Serafina didn't just take Dante. She made sure Evelyn watched her do it. That was the part that didn't leave, not the sight of them together. Evelyn could have told herself it was a mistake, a moment of weakness, something that happened once and meant nothing. People lie to themselves about things like that all the time. She'd seen women do it. She'd pitied them for it. But Serafina looked directly at her through the gap in that door and smiled. Not a startled smile, not embarrassment, not even cruelty in the way that comes from a hot, impulsive moment. It was slow, deliberate. The smile of someone who had been waiting years for exactly this. That smile said, "I planned this. I wanted you to see it. And now you know." If you were standing where Evelyn stood barefoot on cold marble, engagement ring still on your finger, the man you were supposed to marry in 3 weeks, on the other side of that door with your little sister, what would you have done? Would you have screamed, thrown the door open, collapsed right there in the hallway? Or would you have done what Evelyn did, stood completely still, pressed your hand flat against the wall to keep from falling, and made the quietest, most permanent decision of your entire life? This is her story. And trust me, you're going to want to stay until the end. If you're new here, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that notification bell so you never miss what's coming next. These stories are going to take you places you didn't expect to go. Drop a like and leave a comment with your city or country. I genuinely want to know how far this story has traveled. Now let's go back to Rome, 5 years before any of this made sense. The engagement party had been Dante's idea. Not a party, exactly, he'd called it an intimate dinner, which in Dante Moretti's world meant 40 people in a private villa outside Rome, a chef imported from Florence, and wine that cost more per bottle than most people's monthly rent. Evelyn had sat beside him, at the head of a long table draped in white linen, and tried not to look like she was counting the exits. She wasn't unhappy. That was the complicated part of all this. She had not been unhappy. She loved Dante in the way you love something that frightens you a little. The way you love standing at the edge of something enormous and beautiful, and knowing if you lean even slightly wrong, you fall. That was Dante. That had always been Dante. They'd met 3 years before the engagement party, at a fundraiser that Evelyn's firm had organized. She worked as a legal translator then, freelance, good enough at it to get invited to the kind of events where men like Dante Moretti made charitable donations that were less about generosity and more about optics. Stopped beside her at the edge of the room, not because she was the most beautiful woman there, though she was striking in a way that had more to do with how she held herself than anything she wore. He stopped because she was the only person in the room who looked genuinely bored. "You know, most people pretend to enjoy these things," he'd said. She'd glanced at him sideways. "I know. I got tired of pretending around hour 2. He'd laughed, a real one, which apparently surprised him, because he'd looked briefly like a man who'd misplaced something and then found it in an unexpected drawer. 3 years. Dinners that stretched past midnight. Arguments about things that mattered and things that didn't. His world bleeding slowly into hers, and her refusing to fully disappear into it. She knew what he was. She wasn't naive about the Moretti name or what it carried. But Dante had been careful with her in ways she'd never expected from someone who was professionally ruthless with everyone else. Or so she'd believed. The engagement party wound down around 11. Evelyn had slipped away from the table to find a bathroom on the second floor, see it. Down one's had lines, and she'd taken the long corridor past the guest wing. The one with the tall windows looking out over the garden, lit up with string lights below. She was almost back to the stairs when she heard a voice. Serafina's laugh. She'd know it anywhere. 3 years younger, louder in every room, the kind of laugh that had a slight edge to it, even at its most genuine, like it was always also a little bit at something. At someone. Evelyn slowed. She didn't have a reason to be suspicious. Serafina had been at the party. Of course, she was somewhere in the villa. The laugh probably meant nothing. She pushed the door slightly, not opened it, just let her knuckles rest against it, and allowed the latch to ease back an inch. 3 inches. That was all it took, and that smile. She stood there for 4 seconds, maybe 5. Long enough to know with absolute certainty what she was seeing, long enough for Serafina's eyes to find hers, long enough for the smile to spread fully and deliberately across her sister's face like something that had been practiced. Then Evelyn walked away. She didn't run. That was the thing she would think about later. In cheap hostels and rented rooms across 3 countries, she didn't run. She walked slowly, one foot in front of the other, back down the long corridor with the tall windows, down the stairs, through the dining room, where the caterers were clearing plates, out through a side door to the garden. The string lights looked unbearable. She stood in the dark at the edge of the garden, where the light didn't reach, and breathed until her hands stopped shaking. It took a while. There was a couple near the fountain, laughing at something. Two of Dante's associates near the far hedge talking low. Nobody noticed Evelyn standing in the shadow of a cedar tree, with her entire future quietly dissolving around her. She went back inside. She climbed the stairs again, different corridor this time, and she found the bedroom that had been designated for her things when she'd arrived. She took off the ring. She set it on the nightstand beside the small lamp that was still on. She found a notepad in the nightstand drawer. She wrote 2 words. I saw she folded it in half, put it beside the ring. Then she picked up her handbag, went back downstairs, and spent 20 minutes making small talk with Dante's aunt about gardens before slipping out the front door and calling a car. By the time she reached the hotel where she'd been staying before the party, she had already started making a different kind of plan. Not a revenge plan, not an emotional explosion waiting to happen. A quiet, logistical plan, the kind of plan you make when the grief is so large you can't look at it directly yet, so you look at practical things instead. Documents she'd need. Money she had access to that wasn't tied to Dante. The translation contacts she'd built over 3 years, who owed her nothing but would pay for good work. She packed a bag. Not her whole life there wasn't time, and she didn't want it all anyway. The things that mattered, her laptop, the small photograph of her mother that lived in the front pocket of every bag she'd ever owned. 3 changes of clothes, her passport. She booked a bus to the coast. Then a flight from Naples. She didn't sleep that night. She sat in the hotel room with the lights off and watched the ceiling get gray with early morning and thought about Serafina. Not about Dante, not yet. Dante was a wound she'd have to tend to eventually, but Dante's betrayal at least had the familiar shape of a man being weak, being selfish, being what men like him too often were when they thought they were invisible. That she could categorize, that she could in time set down somewhere and stop carrying. Serafina was different. Serafina was her sister, 26 years old, the one who'd called Evelyn from college at 2 in the morning during a bad breakup. The one Evelyn had driven 3 hours to pick up when she'd been stranded at a festival with a dead phone. The one who'd been a bridesmaid at every wedding in their extended family and who always caught Evelyn's eye across the table at family dinners when some relative said something ridiculous, and they'd both have to look away to keep from laughing. That woman had looked through a 3-inch gap in a door and smiled. The bus left at 6:15. Evelyn was on it. She did not call Serafina. She did not send a message. She sat in the 3rd row with her bag on the seat beside her and watched Rome disappear through the window and told herself she would fall apart later, properly, when she had the space to do it somewhere nobody could see. Later turned out to be a bathroom in the Naples airport, 12 minutes before her boarding call. She sat on the floor of a locked stall and cried until her chest hurt. Then she washed her face, fixed what she could, and walked to the gate. She boarded the plane. She did not look back. Dante found the ring and the note at 6:45 in the morning, when the last of the party guests had gone, and he went looking for Evelyn to tell her they'd finally have the villa to themselves. He stood in the doorway of the bedroom, holding the note for a long time. Long enough that Marcello, his lieutenant, his right hand for the past decade, one of the very few people Dante had ever genuinely trusted, eventually appeared at the end of the corridor and knew from the way Dante was standing that something had gone badly wrong. "Get me a car," Dante said. "Where? I don't know yet." He folded the note very carefully and put it in his jacket pocket. "She's gone. Find out which direction." It took them until noon to establish that Evelyn had taken a bus and then a flight. It took another 4 hours to determine the flight had gone to Lisbon. By the time Dante's people reached the city, there was no trail left to follow, no hotel under her name, no credit card activity, nothing. She had a talent for that, it turned out, for covering her tracks. He hadn't known that about her, and the discovery sat in him like a stone. Serafina, when he confronted her that afternoon, was defensive in the way of someone who had already assembled their alibi. She hadn't meant it to happen. It had been nothing. She didn't know what Evelyn thought she saw. Dante looked at his sister-in-law, ex-sister-in-law now. though the word felt wrong even to apply, and understood, slowly, that Serafina wasn't sorry. She was calculating whether she'd miscalculated. He asked her to leave. She left. He didn't speak to her again for 2 years. When he finally did, it was through lawyers. In the weeks that followed, Dante Moretti did something he had never in his adult life been required to do. He waited. He made calls, spent money, deployed resources, and then he waited for information that didn't come. Every investigator he hired hit the same wall. Evelyn Veretti had become someone else, and she had done it efficiently. There were moments, and he would never have admitted this to anyone. Not Marcelo, not anyone where the absence of her felt like a physical thing. Like something structural had been quietly removed from the building, and the whole thing was now trembling in ways you couldn't quite see, but could feel in your feet. He kept the note. He didn't know why exactly. He kept it in his jacket pocket until the paper softened at the folds. Then he put it in the desk drawer in his study, the one he always kept locked. I saw 2 words, no accusation, no explosion, no dramatic confrontation. Just, I saw. He had done this. He knew it. Whatever complicated story he might have told himself in the first days about weakness, about the wine, about Serafina having been persistent in ways he hadn't been strong enough to shut down, he knew, in the part of himself that was honest, that he had done this. And Evelyn had not yelled at him. She had not wept. She had simply walked away and disappeared, which was somehow so much worse than anything else she could have done. Meanwhile, Evelyn was learning Portuguese. She was good at languages. That was the thing that had kept her employed and independent since her mid-20s. She had a native English tongue, fluent Italian, strong French, passable Spanish, and now, out of necessity rather than ambition, she was adding Portuguese. She rented a small room in a pension near the waterfront in Cascais, a coastal town 40 minutes west of Lisbon, and she enrolled in an intensive language course, and she took translation work remotely from 2 of her London contacts, who didn't ask questions as long as the documents came back clean. She was 3 weeks into her new, smaller life when she sat on the edge of the bed in her rented room and stared at the 2 lines on a test she'd bought at a pharmacy the day before, and said nothing for a very long time. Twins, the ultrasound tech would tell her 6 weeks later, in matter-of-fact Portuguese, that Evelyn's improving language skills allowed her to understand perfectly clearly. She sat in the parking lot outside the clinic for 45 minutes after that appointment. She thought about calling Dante. She got as far as opening her phone, finding the number she'd never actually deleted, hovering over it. She sat there with her thumb a centimeter from his name, and she thought about the party, about the string lights, about the corridor with the tall windows, about 3 inches of space through an open door, about Serafina's smile. She put the phone away. If she called him, he would come. She knew that with a certainty that had nothing to do with hope and everything to do with knowing who Dante Moretti was, he would come. And he would bring his world with him. The security, the surveillance, the men who stood outside doors. The power that protected and the power that suffocated. The life she'd been quietly half-questioning for months. The one where she attended dinners and smiled at people she didn't trust and translated the language of power for a man who wielded it without ever having to explain himself. She was pregnant. She was also, for the first time in 3 years, making her own decisions again. She chose not to call. She moved inland briefly, then back to the coast. She settled eventually in a small town south of Porto called Vila Nova de Gaia, where the buildings were old and the streets were narrow, and nobody knew her last name. She rented a 2-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a building that smelled like coffee and salt air. She built a clientele of local businesses who needed documents translated for international contracts. She learned to cook in a kitchen smaller than the bathroom she'd had in Rome. The boys were born in January in a hospital where she spoke Portuguese with an accent that still made nurses smile, but nobody said anything unkind. She named them Nicholas, Nico, and Julian. Julian came first by 8 minutes and immediately made his opinion of the world known at high volume. Nico arrived quieter, looked around at everything with large dark eyes, seemed to be assessing whether the place merited his participation. She went home with 2 infants and no help, and for about 6 weeks, she existed purely in the animal state of new motherhood, feeding, sleeping in broken pieces, feeding again, barely registering the world outside the apartment as anything more than ambient noise. Then she surfaced, and she built. She hired a part-time childminder, a widowed woman named Dona Fernanda from the ground floor, who had raised 5 children and could be trusted to be honest and competent without being intrusive. She rebuilt her client list. She negotiated better rates. She enrolled the boys in a playgroup at 2, in a small nursery school at 3, and she attended every parent meeting and every little performance, and kept a running list of which children they liked and which adults seemed worth knowing. She did not think about Rome very often. When she did, she was deliberate about what she allowed herself to feel, and for how long. She thought about Dante sometimes at night, in the specific and unhelpful way you think about someone who is woven into enough of your memory that cutting them out completely would leave gaps you'd always notice. She did not think about Serafina. She had filed Serafina away. In the category of losses she'd stopped trying to understand, the ones where understanding would only reopen the wound without offering any particular relief. The boys grew. Julian grew fast and loud and enthusiastic, the kind of child who woke up already talking and greeted strangers in the street with opinions. Nico grew steadier, more watchful, prone to sitting close to Evelyn and asking questions that occasionally stopped her cold at 4 years old. He had once looked up from his dinner plate and said, without preamble, "Mama, why don't we have a papa?" And she had answered as honestly as she could manage, which was to say that some families were built differently, and that theirs was complete the way it was. And he had considered this information, with the gravity of a small judge, nodded once, and returned to his food. She had excused herself to the bathroom after that, and stood with her back against the wall for a minute before she could go back out. She did not tell them about Dante. She told herself it was because they were too young. Then she told herself it was because she'd need a story she could live with long term. Then she stopped telling herself anything and just kept going, which is what you do when the real answer is too complicated to look at straight. The real answer was that naming Dante meant making him real in their world. It meant leaving a door open that she had closed very deliberately with a folded note and a discarded ring. It meant one day they might go looking. She wasn't ready for that. Nico and Julian were 4 years old when a photographer from a Porto-based tourism magazine came through Vila Nova de Gaia, shooting a story on the wine lodges and the waterfront, and Evelyn happened to be in 3 of the frames' background. Nothing important. A woman walking with 2 small boys past a row of painted tiles. The magazine ran the photographs online. The facial recognition software that Dante Moretti had been running on European databases for the better part of 3 years flagged a 94.7% match within 72 hours. She didn't know any of this, of course. She was making pasta on a Tuesday night when her life was found. The boys were at the kitchen table, arguing about something that had started as a disagreement about whose drawing was better and had somehow evolved into a philosophical dispute about whether blue was objectively superior to orange. Julian insisted that blue was correct because the sky was blue. Nico pointed out, with devastating calm, that the sky was also sometimes orange, which Julian did not have an answer for, which made Julian louder. Evelyn was salting water and half-heartedly mediating and thinking about a contract she needed to finish before morning when her phone buzzed on the counter. Unknown number. Portuguese country code, but the prefix was unfamiliar. She let it go to voicemail. It buzzed again. She dried her hands and answered. "Evelyn Marin," said the voice on the other end, and it was Marcelo Russo's voice, which she recognized immediately because some voices you do not forget, and something in her chest went very cold very fast. "You have the wrong number," she said. "I don't," Marcelo said. "I'm sorry to call you this way. I need you to know that we're not—" He paused. "He just wants to know you're safe." That's all this was supposed to be. She ended the call. She stood at the kitchen counter with her phone in her hand while her sons argued about the color of the sky, and she understood that the life she'd built here, the one with the salt air apartment and Dona Fernanda and the pasta on Tuesday nights, had just developed a crack that was not going to stop spreading. She didn't sleep that night. She spent the dark hours sitting in the chair by the window that looked out over the narrow street below, watching headlights move past, thinking. She had to assess this the way she'd taught herself to assess most things over the past 5 years, not emotionally, not through the lens of what she felt, but practically. What had changed, what her options were, what she needed to do next. What had changed was that Dante knew where she was. She spent the next 3 days making contingency plans. Cash she'd kept in reserve, a contact in Faro she'd worked with once, who might be able to help her move again quickly. The boys' documents, which were in Evelyn Marin's name now, complete and legitimate and clean. On the fourth day, she walked Nico and Julian to their nursery school in the morning, came home, sat down at her desk to work, and became aware, in the slow and particular way you become aware of things when you're already on edge, that the street outside had been quieter than usual this morning. Not quieter, stiller. She got up and stood at the window. Down in the street, a black car was parked on the opposite side. German make. Tinted windows. Nothing that would alarm most people. Everything that alarmed Evelyn. She didn't recognize it as Calderon. Not yet. She only knew it was wrong. She was pulling on her jacket, phone in hand, already thinking about getting the boys from school and getting somewhere she could think clearly, when she heard voices in the stairwell. 2 men. Her building had 12 residents. She knew most of their voices by now. These weren't them. She had just enough time to back away from the door before the knock came. Hard. The kind of knock that wasn't a question. Ms. Marin said, a voice in Portuguese, with the kind of accent that said it hadn't started out speaking Portuguese. "We need to speak with you." She didn't answer. "Ms. Marin, we know you're inside, and we know you have 2 children at the Escola on Rua dos Ferreiros." Her blood went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. And then, from the stairwell below the 2 men's position, she heard a third voice. Not raised, not threatening, just very, very quiet. "Walk away." She knew that voice too. She would have known it anywhere. The 2 men in the stairwell went very still. Evelyn heard it, the specific quality of silence that falls over people when they realize the situation has changed in a way they weren't prepared for. One of them shifted his weight. She could hear the sole of his shoe on the tile. Then nothing for 3 full seconds. "This isn't your concern," the first man said, in Italian now, not Portuguese. "Walk away," Dante said again, same volume, same tone. The kind of voice that doesn't need to get louder to mean more. A pause. Then the sound of 2 men recalculating. Evelyn stood on her side of the door with her back against the wall, not breathing, listening to the stairwell like she could see through it. There was a muttered exchange. She couldn't fully make out, something about orders, something about timing, and then footsteps. Going down, both sets. The front door of the building opened and closed. Silence. Then a knock at her door, different from the first one. "Careful, Evelyn." She stayed where she was. "I know you're right there," Dante said. "I can wait. I've been waiting 5 years. A few more minutes doesn't change anything." She closed her eyes, opened them, looked at the door like it had personally failed her. She opened it. He looked older. Not badly older. There were lines at the corners of his eyes that hadn't been there before, and something in the way he held himself that was different, a weight in the set of his shoulders that she didn't remember. He was wearing a dark jacket, no tie, the kind of deliberately unremarkable clothing that men like Dante wore when they were trying not to be noticed, which never really worked, because men like Dante were noticed regardless. He looked at her and didn't say anything for a moment. Then he looked past her into the apartment. "Are they here?" he asked. "They're at school," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. He nodded slowly. Something moved across his face that she didn't have a name for and didn't want to examine closely. "Who were those men?" she said. Not a question. An accusation she was arranging into question shape. "Calderon," he said. "Rival family. They found you because I found you. They've had eyes on my investigation for months. When my people moved toward Portugal, they moved too." He looked like he wanted to say more and was stopping himself. "I'm sorry. I didn't know they were already positioned." "You led them here?" "Yes." She appreciated that he didn't dress it up. She hated that she appreciated it. "You need to come with me," he said. "Both of you. The boys too. I have a secured location." "No," she said. "Evelyn." "No." She stepped back from the door. "You don't get to show up after 5 years and start issuing instructions. You don't get to do that. Those men were going to use your children as leverage against me." "My children," she said, "are none of your business." The word landed. She watched it land. Something in Dante's jaw tightened and then deliberately released, like he was deciding not to respond to it the way his first instinct told him to. "You know that's not—" he started. "Don't," she said. "Don't stand there and tell me what I know." He was quiet for a moment. Down us in the street, someone honked once, distant and ordinary, the city doing what cities do while people's lives fractured in stairwells and doorways. "The Calderons will come back," Dante said. "Not today, not while I'm here." but they don't let things go. If they believe your boys are my sons, they will use that. It doesn't matter what the truth is. It only matters what they believe. Evelyn said nothing. Are they? He asked, quietly. Not aggressively. Evelyn, are they mine? She looked at him for a long time. She thought about the past 5 years, about all the moments she'd rehearsed this conversation in her own head, and all the ways she'd decided it would go, and none of them had started with two strange men in her stairwell, and Dante appearing like something she'd left behind, that had grown legs and found its way home. They're mine, she said. I raised them. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting today. She started to close the door. He put his hand against it, not hard, not forcing it, just a flat palm against the wood. I need you to understand what's coming, he said. The Calderons are not going to stop because you want them to. Me being here changes the calculation, but only for now. You have to let me help you. Why, she said. So you can feel better about yourself? That one hit different. She could see it. He took it without expression, but his hand dropped from the door. Because I made choices that put you here, he said. And whatever you think of me, whatever I deserve, your children don't deserve to be caught in consequences they have nothing to do with. She looked at his hand, now at his side. She thought about those two men in her stairwell, saying they knew where her children went to school. She hated this. She hated every piece of it. You have 3 hours, she said, before I pick them up from school, and you don't come anywhere near them today. Not yet, he nodded. She stepped back and let him in. He came inside and stood in the middle of her apartment and looked around in a way she found almost unbearable to watch, taking in the small kitchen, the drawings on the refrigerator held with magnets, the two backpacks hanging by the door, one blue and one green, a pair of small sneakers near the mat, a drawing half finished on the coffee table, a mess of orange crayon that might have been a lion, or might have been a fire, or might have been both. His face did something complicated and private that she turned away from. Sit down, she said, because it was better than watching him stand there, looking at her son's drawings. He sat. She put the kettle on because she needed something to do with her hands. She leaned against the kitchen counter and faced him. Tell me about the Calderon, she said. Everything. Not the version you think I need to hear. The real version, he told her. The Calderon family had been positioning themselves against the Moretti operation for 3 years, slow and systematic. The way you approach something you want to destroy carefully enough that the pieces don't scatter in ways you can't control. They'd started by picking off Moretti allies on the margins, nothing aggressive enough to warrant open war, but enough to erode the edges of the network. 6 months ago, they'd shifted strategy. They'd started looking at personal leverage rather than business leverage. People Dante cared about. Weak points. They found out about the search, Dante said. My people looking for you. They started cross-referencing the same databases, running parallel investigations. When facial recognition flagged you, how long ago, Evelyn said. 8 days. 8 days. She'd had 8 days of not knowing, of sitting at her desk translating shipping documents and watching the boys eat dinner. 8 days of unknowing vulnerability. And you waited 8 days to warn me. I was trying to understand the situation before I... You were watching, she said. You were out there watching us. He didn't deny it. How long, she said, before that phone call from Marcelo? How long were you already here? Silence, Dante. 4 days, he said. She set down the cup she'd picked up and didn't speak for a moment, because the thing she wanted to say was not something she was going to say in a volume that the building could hear. You stood outside, she said, voice tight and even, for 4 days. Watching my children. Without telling me, I needed to know. You needed to know what? She came around from behind the counter. What exactly did you need 4 days to figure out? Their eye color? Whether they look like you? Whether they exist? Whether you were safe? He said. Whether the life you'd built was whether it was what? He stopped. He looked at his hands, which were laced together on the table. He looked like a man who had rehearsed a version of this conversation that was now completely useless to him. Whether it was good, he said. Whether you were okay. The honesty of it stopped her. Not because it softened anything it didn't, but because it was real, and she hadn't expected real. She'd expected justification, management, the practiced cadence of a man who was accustomed to controlling the narrative in any room he entered. I was okay, she said. I was fine. I built something here and I was fine. I know, he said. I could see that. And then you led dangerous people to my door. Yes, he didn't move, I know. She sat down across from him. Not because she felt conciliatory. Because her legs were tired in a way that had nothing to do with the day, and everything to do with the past 5 years, catching up to her all at once, arriving today, uninvited, with Dante Moretti as their delivery mechanism. What do you want? She said. And don't tell me you just want to keep us safe. Tell me the real answer. He looked at her. The Dante she remembered had been good at maintaining expression, at keeping his face professionally unreadable. This version was less armored, which was worse in some ways, because it meant she could see things she'd have preferred not to see. I want to my sons, he said. There it was. She'd known it was coming, of course she'd known, but hearing it said directly, and without decoration, still landed somewhere central and sore. You don't know that they are, she said, Evelyn. His voice was quiet. I've seen them. You watch them from a street. Children look like all kinds of... Julian has my grandmother's hands, Dante said. The way the fingers sit when he's concentrating on something. I watched him drawing from across the street for 40 minutes. My grandmother had those hands. I know them. She said nothing. And Nico's jawline is my father's, he said. And they're both 5, which would make them. Stop. She held up one hand, not angry. Just stop. Just stop, he stopped. She got up and went to the window. Below, the street was ordinary. A woman with a wheeled shopping bag. A teenager on a bicycle. The city going about its Tuesday. If I say yes, she said to the window, what does that mean? Tell me exactly what that means in your world, Dante. What does it mean for them? It means they're protected, he said. It means the Calderons can't use them as leverage, because there's nothing to leverage. It means they have a father. It means they're Moretti heirs, she said. It means they're targets. They're already targets. That happened when the Calderons made the connection. The only question now is whether they have the protection that comes with the name or just the danger. She turned around. That's a very convenient argument. It's a true one. Convenient things can be true, she said. That doesn't mean I have to like them. He stood up. He wasn't doing it to loom. He just wasn't the kind of man who could make difficult arguments from a seated position. He came to stand near the window, not close to her, giving her the distance she clearly needed, and looked out at the same ordinary street. I'm not asking for anything today, he said. I'm not asking for what I don't deserve. I just need you and the boys somewhere safe while I deal with the Calderons, and after that, he stopped. After that, whatever you decide, I'll accept. You'll accept, she repeated. Yes, you'll accept me telling you to leave and never come back. A pause. Yes, she looked at the side of his face. At the lines that hadn't been there before, the gray starting at his temples. 5 years was 5 years. They'd both been somewhere different separately, and they'd both arrived here, carrying things the other one hadn't seen accumulate. I need to get the boys, she said, 3 o'clock. I'll have Marcelo bring a car. I'll walk, she said. I always walk. I'm not going to send 2 men in dark jackets to collect my children from school like a police operation. That's not their life. He started to say something and stopped himself. Marcelo can follow at a distance, she said, far enough that nobody at the school notices. And she looked at him directly. You stay here. That's my condition, she said. Or there are no conditions at all, and you find somewhere else to execute your plan. Another pause. Shorter this time. All right, he said. She picked up her jacket. She put it on slowly, not because she was moving slowly, but because her hands weren't entirely steady, and she didn't want him to see that. Don't touch anything, she said at the door. I won't. She left. The walk to the school took 12 minutes. She had done it so many times she could have done it, with her eyes closed, left at the painted blue building, down the hill, right at the bakery where Nico always slowed down near the window even when he wasn't hungry. She walked it now and tried to think clearly, and found that her thoughts kept sliding sideways, into the look on Dante's face when he'd seen the drawings on the refrigerator, into the sound of those 2 men's footsteps going down the stairs. She got to the school at 10 minutes to 3 and stood near the gate where she always stood, and smiled at the 2 other mothers she recognized, and said normal things about the weather. At 3 o'clock exactly, Julian came through the doors at a sprint, because Julian always moved at a sprint, and she crouched down and caught him, and he talked directly into her neck about something that had happened at lunch involving a misunderstanding about whose orange was whose. Very unjust, deeply felt. Nico came behind him at his own pace. He looked at her face as he approached, and she saw him notice something. He was 5 years old, and he noticed things. He reached her and pressed close without saying anything, and she put her arm around him and held him there for a moment longer than usual. "Everything okay?" he said, muffled against her jacket. "Yes," she said. "Let's go home." She walked them back up the hill. Julian described the orange situation in exhaustive detail and moved on to something that had happened during drawing time, and then to a theory he had about what was underneath the road. Nico walked quietly on her other side and held her hand, which he usually only did when he was thinking hard about something. At the corner near the bakery, she glanced back without making it obvious. Marcelo's car was 2 blocks behind. She caught the shape of it and looked away. She thought about what Dante had said, about protection versus danger, about the name and what came with it. She thought about what she'd built in this apartment, in this street, this specific and carefully constructed ordinary life. She thought about those 2 men's voices, saying they knew where her children went to school. She opened the door to the building. Dante was standing at the kitchen counter. He had not touched anything. He had, apparently, stood in the same spot for 45 minutes, which should have been odd, but instead landed as something she filed away without comment. Julian stopped dead in the doorway. He looked at Dante with the uncomplicated, direct assessment of a 5-year-old, which involved no subtlety whatsoever and full commitment. "Who are you?" Julian said. Evelyn opened her mouth. She had nothing prepared. She had known this moment was coming for 5 years in the abstract, and she had still not prepared for it because there was no prepared version that didn't cost something. Nico came in behind Julian and also looked at Dante and also said nothing. His hand was still in Evelyn's. She felt his grip tighten slightly. Dante looked at both boys and then at Evelyn. She gave him nothing. No direction, no script. This was his to navigate or destroy. He crouched down so he was at their level. He looked at Julian first, at the familiar hands, the dark eyes, the energy barely contained in a small frame, and then at Nico, steadier and watchful beside his mother. "My name is Dante," he said. "I'm an old friend of your mother's." Julian considered this. "From where?" "Italy," Dante said. "We're learning about Italy," Julian announced. "In school. There's a big tower that leans." "There is," Dante said. "I've seen it. Does it fall over?" "Not yet." Julian seemed satisfied with this. He dropped his backpack on the floor and headed for the kitchen with the single-minded purposefulness of a who'd been thinking about his afternoon snack since approximately 1:30. "Mama, can I have the crackers?" "Wash your hands first," she said, automatic. Nico hadn't moved. He was still looking at Dante, who was still crouched down, the 2 of them at eye level. Something was happening between them that was quiet and serious, and that Evelyn was not going to interrupt. "You made her sad," Nico said, evenly, no aggression. Just information, delivered in the way Nico delivered most things, like he'd weighed it first. Dante didn't flinch. "Yes," he said. "I did. Because I made a bad choice," Dante said, "a long time ago. And I hurt her." Nico thought about this. "Are you sorry?" "Very. Did you tell her?" "Not yet, I was hoping to." Nico looked up at Evelyn. She didn't give him anything she couldn't have, even if she'd tried. He looked back at Dante. "Okay," he said, and he released Evelyn's hand and went to wash his hands alongside Julian. Evelyn looked at the space where Nico had been standing. She needed a moment. She looked at the ceiling briefly instead, which didn't help, and then at the wall, which also didn't help. "He's 5, she said, quietly, to Dante, who had straightened up again and was standing in the middle of her kitchen, looking like a man who'd taken a blow, and was quietly determining whether he was going to stay standing. "I know," he said. "Don't you dare make him like you," she said. "Don't you dare walk in here and be patient and reasonable and make my sons like you before I've decided anything." "Evelyn, I mean it, Dante." "I hear you," he said. "But I can't," he stopped. "I can't look at them and feel nothing." I'm sorry. I don't know how to do that." She looked at him. At the honest wreckage of the sentence. She hated that she understood it. "You're not staying here tonight," she said. "I have a car outside. I'll be close. There's a hotel 3 streets over. I need to be closer than—" "Hotel," she said. "Or you leave the city entirely, and I handle this myself." He read her face. He knew she meant it. He'd always been able to read her. That had been one of the things, early on, that had felt like intimacy, being seen clearly by someone who paid that quality of attention. Now it felt different. Now it felt like a tool she'd rather not have deployed in her direction. "Hotel," so he said. "Good." Julian came back from the kitchen already eating a cracker, unreasonably happy about it. He looked at Dante. Are you staying for dinner? Not tonight, Evelyn said, before Dante could answer. Julian shrugged. Okay, do you like orange crackers? I don't know, Dante said. I don't think I've had them. Julian held one out with the gravity of a person offering something genuinely valuable. Dante took it. He ate it. He said it was good, which was either true or the most committed performance Evelyn had witnessed in recent memory. Julian nodded, satisfied, and went to find his brother. Dante looked at Evelyn. She looked at the door. He left. She stood in the kitchen after the door closed and listened to her sons bicker cheerfully in the other room about whose drawing from school was better, and she pressed both hands flat against the counter and breathed slowly, the way you breathe when you're trying to convince your nervous system that the emergency is over. It wasn't over. She knew it wasn't over. Dante called at 9 that night after the boys were asleep. She sat on the edge of her bed in the dark and answered. Marcelo is outside, he said. Front and back. 2 men I trust. I know, she said. She'd noticed the car. What about the Calderons? They've pulled back for now. They'll reassess once they understand I'm here in force. How long does that buy us? Days. Maybe a week. She absorbed this and then we need to move. I want to take you and the boys to a property outside Sintra. It's secured, Private. I have a job, she said. The boys have school. I have a life here, Dante. I know, I'm not dismantling 5 years of... Evelyn. His voice was careful. I understand. I'm not asking you to dismantle anything permanently. I'm asking you to let me keep you safe while I neutralize the threat. Once the Calderons are dealt with, you can do whatever you decide. Go back, stay, leave, whatever you decide, she sat with this. Tell me about the Sintra property, she said. He told her. House on 12 acres, full security staff, pool, which Julian would immediately need to be warned about around 9 times a day. Enough space that she wouldn't feel like she was living inside a bodyguard operation. A car available to her at all times, she listened. The boys have questions, she said when he was finished. They're going to have questions about why we're moving and what's happening, and they're going to want answers I can't give them without... She stopped. Without telling them who I am, he said. Yes, then tell them, he said. I have been managing this for 5 years without your input, she said. Don't tell me how to talk to my children. You're right, he said. I'm sorry. She lay back on the bed. The ceiling was dark. Through the wall she could hear Nico's breathing, slow, and even he slept like someone who had made peace with the world and would revisit the question in the morning. Julian's going to be delighted, she said, before she could stop herself. A pause. Then quietly, yeah? He's going to think it's an adventure. He already thinks everything is an adventure. Last week he thought the grocery store was an adventure. She heard something in Dante's breath that might have been a laugh that didn't fully happen. And Nico? Nico is going to have questions, she said. A lot of them. He's going to want logic and structure, and he's going to know if you're not telling him the full truth. He's like you, Dante said. She didn't answer that. Evelyn, he said. I want to say, not tonight, she said. Whatever it is. Not tonight, another pause. Okay. Good night, Dante. Good night. She ended the call. She lay in the dark for a long time. The next morning, she told the boys they were going on a trip. Julian responded exactly the way she'd predicted. Immediate enthusiasm. Several logistical questions about whether there would be snacks in the car, and a firm request that they bring the drawing he'd been working on. Nico looked at her. Is it because of the man from yesterday? He asked. Dante. She looked at her son, 5 years old, looking at her with that steady, dark-eyed attention that made her feel, not for the first time, that she was being handled by someone who understood her better than was entirely fair. Partly, she said. Nico considered this. Is he going to be there, at the trip place? Probably, she said. Okay, Nico said, and he went to pack his drawing. She called Dante. We'll go today, this afternoon. I'll have everything ready, and Dante. She paused. You said you'd let me set the pace. I need you to mean that. I mean it, he said. Because if you push, I know. If you push, she said, I will take my children and disappear again, and this time I will be better at it. The silence on the line had weight. I know, he said. And this time she believed him. The drive to Sintra took just over an hour. Both boys fell asleep 20 minutes in, the way children do on car journeys, boneless and absolute. Evelyn sat in the passenger seat with Marcelo driving and watched the landscape shift from city to coast to green hills and thought about the woman she'd been 5 years ago in this same country, newly arrived, newly pregnant, planning a life on the fly. She'd built something good here. She'd done it without anyone's help, without a network, without money she hadn't earned, without anyone's name but her own. She needed to remember that. She needed to keep hold of it, in whatever was coming, because it was the truest thing she knew about herself. The house outside Sintra was a low stone building set back from the road, surrounded by dense trees and the kind of quiet that felt deliberate. There were men at the gate, she clocked 4 before they were through, and a garden that was large enough for 2 boys to genuinely get lost in, which was going to be simultaneously wonderful and logistically challenging. Dante was there when they arrived. He was waiting outside the front door, which she'd told him not to do, but he'd done it anyway, and she let it go because she could see from the slight tension across his shoulders that waiting inside had apparently been beyond him. Julian woke up as the car stopped, looked at the garden, and said, "Oh wow," with the totality of a person who has been given exactly what they didn't know to ask for. Nico woke up more slowly. He looked out the window. He looked at Dante standing there. He got out of the car and walked to the garden without a word to anyone, moving through the gate in the stone wall like a small ship finding its channel, and began walking the perimeter the way his mother would have, assessing the space methodically before committing to anything. Dante watched him. "He needs to figure things out for himself," Evelyn said beside him. "I know," Dante said. "He gets that from you." She didn't answer. Julian was already 20 meters into the garden, having identified what appeared to be a section of low stone wall that could function as a climbing structure, and was testing its structural integrity with 1 foot while narrating his findings to nobody in particular. "This is going to be a great deal of work," she said. "I know," Dante said again. He almost smiled. She walked past him and into the house. She had told herself she had time. She had told herself that the move to Sintra was a temporary concession to a dangerous situation, that she retained control, that nothing was decided, that she and Dante had an agreement, and that agreement had clear limits. She had told herself all of that, and she believed most of it. What she hadn't accounted for was the 4th day. On the 4th day, she was sitting at the kitchen table working on a translation, the boys outside with Marcelo, who had turned out, improbably, to be excellent with children, and Dante came in from a call in the garden and said, "Sit down," in a voice she hadn't heard before. She looked up from her laptop. "The Calderons," he said, "have made a move. One of my informants inside their network confirmed it an hour ago." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat. "They're planning to take the boys." The room contracted slightly. "When?" she said. 3 days, he said, maybe less. "They have a contact inside the local police jurisdiction. They're planning something that looks legal on the surface, a welfare check, custody dispute documentation, something manufactured. Once the boys are separated from you in any official-seeming context, they make their move before anyone can verify anything." She stared at him. "I can fight it," he said. "I have lawyers, I have connections, but this is going to move fast and I need—" He stopped. "Evelyn, I need to acknowledge them legally, as my sons. Right now, they're legally no one to me. I have no standing. If the Calderons manufacture something official, I have no grounds to intervene, because on paper, I'm a stranger." The word fell into the room and settled there. A stranger. Nico and Julian outside in the garden right now. Running some kind of race. Marcelo was losing deliberately. They were 5 years old, and they had only ever known one parent and one name, and one small apartment full of drawings and Tuesday pasta, and the sound of her working in the next room. She looked at Dante. She looked at the man who had destroyed her old life in a corridor in Rome, with a 3-inch gap in a door, who had spent 5 years building a machine to find her, who had crouched in her kitchen and told her 5-year-old son, "Yes, I hurt her," without flinching. "What are you asking me?" she said. "I'm asking you to let me claim them," he said. "Legally, properly, with documentation. Not for me, I know how that sounds. I know how everything I say sounds right now. But because it's the only thing that puts a legal wall between them and what the Calderons are planning. And once you claim them legally," she said, "there's no going back." "No," he said, "there isn't." She stood up. She walked to the window. Outside, she could see Julian attempting to explain something to Marcelo with enormous arm gestures. She could see Nico sitting on the stone wall watching Julian with the expression he wore when he was deciding whether his brother needed saving or just audience. Her sons. She had built them. She had built the people they were becoming, with her own hands and her own decisions, and 5 years of doing the right thing quietly without any fanfare. She had done that. And none of it, none of the apartment, or the crackers, or the Tuesday pasta, or Dona Fernanda's steady presence, or the nursery school on Rua dos Ferreiros, none of it was going to matter if the Calderons got 3 minutes alone with her boys in a room with a legal document and a story that hadn't happened. She turned around. "You do this my way," she said. "Everything, my way. Nothing happens without my agreement." "Yes," he said, "and we tell the boys the truth. All of it. Appropriate to their age. But the truth, no stories, no managed versions." "Yes. And if at any point I say stop, then we stop," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about all the doors in her life she'd walked through, and whether she'd regretted them, and how many of the ones she'd been most afraid of had turned out to be the ones that mattered. "Call your lawyers," she said. The sound Dante made barely a sound at all, just a slight exhale. The release of something held a very long time was the sound of a man who had been standing at the edge of a cliff for 5 years and had just found ground under his feet. She didn't let herself feel anything about that. She had just agreed to something that could not be undone in a stone house in the hills above Sintra, while her sons played outside without knowing their world had shifted permanently on its axis. Picked up her coffee cup. It was cold. She drank it anyway. The lawyers arrived the next morning. 2 of them from Dante's Rome firm, carrying leather cases and the particular energy of people who had been handed an unusual problem and were being paid enough not to show how unusual they found it. They sat up at the dining room table with documents and laptops and spoke to Evelyn in careful, measured Italian that she understood perfectly and appreciated precisely 0%. She sat through it with her hands flat on the table and answered every question directly and signed what she was told to sign, and asked 3 questions of her own that neither lawyer had been prepared for, which she could see in the slight recalibration behind their professional expressions. She asked about custody protections under Portuguese law, about what dual acknowledgement meant for the boys' existing documentation under the Marin name, and about the exact legal mechanism by which the Calderon family's manufactured claim could be preempted and neutralized. The lawyers looked at Dante. Dante looked at Evelyn. "Answer," he said. They answered her. It took 4 hours. When it was done, she stood up, shook both lawyers' hand with the kind of firm efficiency that ended conversations, and walked outside to the garden, where Marcelo was attempting to teach Julian and Nico how to play a card game that Julian kept inventing new rules for. She sat on the stone wall and watched her sons for a while. She felt the shape of what she'd just done settling into her, the way large decisions settle not all at once, but in pieces, each one arriving separately and making itself at home before the next one showed up. The boys were legally Moretti now, in the ways that mattered for protection. The paperwork would move, through channels Dante's lawyers controlled. The Calderon operation, the manufactured welfare claim, the false documentation, the plan to use legal machinery as a weapon had been preempted. That was what she had just bought. Safety. At the cost of a door she couldn't reopen. Julian looked up from the card game and waved at her, with all 5 fingers spread wide. She waved back. Nico watched her from his side of the game with his quiet, measuring gaze, and she understood that he was still processing, that Nico processed everything slowly and completely, and she would hear about this later. In the private shorthand they'd developed over 5 years of being a household of 2.5 people, the half being Nico's inner life, which always took up more space than his outer one. She went back inside. Dante was at the kitchen counter, coffee cup in hand, phone face down beside him. He was looking at nothing in particular, the way people look when they're actually looking at something interior. He heard her come in, and his posture shifted slightly, not much, just enough for her to notice that he'd been holding himself carefully while she was outside, and had now stopped. "The boys need to be told," she said. "Today, before they pick it up some other way." He nodded. "Together? Or do you want to do it alone and I?" "Together," she said. "They deserve to see us both in the same room, behaving like adults when they hear this." "Okay," he said. She poured herself coffee. She stood beside him at the counter without meaning to, just because the counter was there, and then chose not to move away from it on principle. They stood in silence for a moment that was not quite comfortable and not quite terrible. Serafina called me, Dante said. She went still. Yesterday, he said, while you were working. I didn't tell you because I didn't want it to be part of the decision you were making. About the lawyers. She set her cup down. What did she want? She heard I was in Portugal. She has sources in Rome who track my movements. She's been in contact with people in my organization, apparently, for some time. He paused. She knows about the boys. Evelyn turned to look at him fully. How? She says she's known for 3 years. The words took a moment to fully arrive. Say that again, Evelyn said. She says she found out through your Portuguese residency records. She has a contact at an administrative level who ran your name, both names, Moretti and Marin, as a favor. She found the birth records. He was watching her carefully, the way you watch someone you know when you're not certain what's coming. She's known since the boys were 2. Evelyn stood very still. She was aware of her own breathing. She was aware of the sound of Julian's voice drifting in from the garden, something about the card game, exuberant and distant. She's known for 3 years, Evelyn said, and she said nothing. Not to you, Dante said. The specific weight of those 3 words took a second to land. To you, Evelyn said. He set his cup down. She sent me a message 8 months ago. Anonymous, it came through a channel I use for third-party intelligence. Nothing attached to a name. Coordinates, a city, no other context. He looked at her steadily. I didn't know it was her. I had no way to know. I ran the coordinates, confirmed the location as the town in Portugal where you were living, and began the investigation that eventually led to the facial recognition. Evelyn said nothing for a long time. The kitchen was very quiet. So she said finally slowly, like she was reading each word off a page before she spoke it. The investigation that led Dante Moretti and his surveillance network and the Calderon family to my door and my children. She stopped. Breathed. Started with an anonymous tip from my sister. I believe so. Yes, you believe so. I had Marcelo trace the origin of the message over the past 48 hours. It connects to a device registered in Serafina's name. He said it without embellishment, without any of the management she might have expected. Just the facts, put down in front of her like items on a table. She picked up her coffee cup. She wasn't going to drink it. She needed something in her hands. She tipped you, Evelyn said. Knowing the Calderons monitored your investigation. Knowing that if you found me, they would too. She may not have understood the Calderon connection. Or she understood it perfectly. The silence that followed was the kind that has a shape. Dante didn't offer her a different interpretation. She appreciated that and hated that she appreciated it. Where is she now? Evelyn said. Rome. She's been living in the city for the past year. She's built a relationship with several people in my extended network. Social mostly, but consistent. Evelyn put the cup down. She walked to the window. The garden was brilliant in the morning light, the kind of light that makes everything look simple and clean and temporary. Julian was standing on the low stone wall with his arms out like wings. Marcelo was doing something with the cards that appeared to involve giving Nico a significant advantage, which Nico was accepting with composed satisfaction. She sent you the tip, Evelyn said to the window, because she wanted you to find me. It looks that way. Not because she wanted to reconnect. Not because she felt guilty. Because she stopped. Because she wanted to know if I still... Dante stopped too. The rest of that sentence didn't need to be spoken. They both knew what it contained. Serafina had not tipped off Dante Moretti's investigation because she felt remorse. She had done it because she wanted to know whether, if Dante found Evelyn, he would go. Whether Evelyn still had what she'd had 5 years ago. Whether Dante would prove, by running to Portugal, that Evelyn was still the one who mattered, or whether 5 years would have changed the equation enough that Serafina might finally, at last, be the answer rather than the test. She'd wanted information. She'd used 2 children as her instrument. Evelyn turned away from the window. I want to talk to her. I wasn't asking, she said. Get me on the phone with her today. Dante looked at her. He seemed to be calculating something, not whether to comply, she thought, but whether there was anything useful he could say first. He decided there wasn't. Give me 10 minutes, he said. He left the room. Evelyn stood in the kitchen alone and looked at the documents still spread across the dining table. The signatures she'd made that morning. The legal architecture she'd consented to build, which now had a different foundation than she'd understood when she'd built it. She had thought she was making a decision in response to the Calderons. She had thought she was acting in protection of her against an external threat that had found her through Dante's legitimate, if painful, 5-year search. She had not known the search had a starting pistol. She had not known her sister had fired it. Dante came back in 11 minutes with his phone extended. She answered, he said. I told her you wanted to speak with her. She's on the line. Evelyn took the phone. She looked at the screen. An Italian number, Rome prefix, the same general range as the one she'd grown up with. She put the phone to her ear. Evelyn, Serafina said. Her voice was careful, constructed, the voice of someone who had had 11 minutes to prepare, which was exactly 11 minutes more than Evelyn had wanted her to have. Tell me why, Evelyn said. A pause. I don't know what Dante told you, but tell me why, Evelyn said again, same volume, same pace. She was not going to do this loudly. You found my records 3 years ago. You sat on the information for over 2 years. Then 8 months ago, you sent him an anonymous tip. Tell me why. Another pause, longer this time. I was worried about you, Serafina said. You were alone. The boys stop, Evelyn said. Evelyn, stop. She moved to the far side of the kitchen, turned her back to the door. You sat for 3 years on the knowledge that I had children, your nephews, and you said nothing to me. You didn't call? You didn't write? You sent a tip to a man with a criminal organization and a surveillance network, and you sent it anonymously through a back channel, knowing he would come and bring whatever came with him. Her voice was perfectly even, and she was aware of how much effort that was costing her. If you'd been worried about me, you would have called me. If you'd wanted those boys to know their father, you would have contacted me and told me you knew and asked what I wanted. You did neither of those things. Silence. So tell me why, Evelyn said. The real reason. The silence extended. And then Serafina made a sound, something small and complicated, somewhere between a breath and a laugh, the particular sound of someone who has decided that the performance is no longer necessary. Because he never stopped looking for you, Serafina said. And the careful construction had dropped out of her voice, and what was underneath it was something rawer and uglier. 5 years. Every resource he had. He spent 5 years looking for you, and I was right there, and he looked through me like I didn't exist, and I thought she stopped. You thought if you gave him what he needed, Evelyn said, he would be grateful enough to finally see you. The silence confirmed it more thoroughly than any answer would have. Evelyn closed her eyes, just for a second. 1 second of having her eyes closed and being in the dark behind them where nobody needed anything from her. You used my children, she said, to get a man's attention. I didn't know about the Calderons. You used my children, Evelyn said, and you sent them into a situation with consequences you were too careless to think through, and you did it for yourself. She opened her eyes. The kitchen was the same kitchen it had been 30 seconds ago. The garden light was the same light. I need you to understand something clearly. Not because it will help you, but because you should know. Are you listening? Yes, Serafina said, very quietly. You are done, Evelyn said. Not in anger. I'm not screaming at you. I want you to understand this is not emotion speaking. You are done as a person in my life and in my children's lives. You will not meet them. You will not contact them. You will not reach them through anyone connected to this family. If you violate that boundary, I will make certain it becomes a legal boundary and not just a personal one. And Dante will help me do that, because right now he is the only piece of all of this I have any reason to trust at all. She paused. Do you understand, Evelyn? Serafina's voice had broken somewhere in the middle of that. Do you understand? A long beat. Yes, Serafina whispered. Evelyn ended the call. She held Dante's phone in her hand for a moment, looking at the screen. Then she set it on the counter, face down, and stood with her back to it, and let the silence of the kitchen hold her for a moment. Dante came back in. He read the room without asking questions, which she was grateful for. He picked up his phone without comment. He moved to the far counter and gave her the space she needed. The boys, she said after a moment. We should do it now. Before I lose my nerve. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. I'm choosing to. She straightened. Get them inside. He went to the garden door and called them in, and they came in the way they always came in together. Julian first and fast, Nico behind, more deliberate. They were flushed from being outside, hair slightly disordered, the specific physical buoyancy of children who've been running. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table and waited for them to settle. Julian climbed into the chair across from her immediately. Nico came around to her side and stood close, the way he did when he was reading the temperature of a situation. She looked at both of them. "I need to tell you something important," she said. "It's a big thing. You might have questions, and I'll answer all of them." Julian leaned forward. He was ready. Julian was always ready. Nico looked at her. Then he looked at Dante, who was standing back, near the door to the garden, not at the table. Then back at her. "Dante is your father," she said. Julian processed this at the speed of someone for whom new information was primarily an opportunity. "Our actual father? Yes. Like he's always been?" "He didn't know you existed," she said. "Until recently." She paused. "That's a complicated story, and I'll explain more when you're a little older. But he's here now, and he's real, and he's your father." Julian swiveled in his chair to look at Dante. "So we're Italian," he said. "You're both," Dante said from the doorway. "Portuguese and Italian." "That's two," Julian said, apparently satisfied by the arithmetic. Nico had not moved. He was still standing close to Evelyn, his shoulder against hers, and he was looking at the table with an expression she knew the face of someone doing math that wasn't about numbers. "Nico," she said softly. He looked up at her. His eyes were very bright, which meant he was working very hard to keep them level. "You knew," he said, "before now. You always knew." "Yes," she said. "I did. Why didn't you tell us before?" She had prepared for this question. She had, in her head, at approximately 2 a.m, the past pre-stop, prepared multiple versions of the answer. She'd discarded all of them, and now she said the true one. "Because I was scared," she said. "Not of him. Of what telling you would mean. And I should have been braver." Nico thought about this. His shoulders stayed against hers. He did not move away. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay?" Julian repeated, looking at his brother. "That's what you say?" "What should I say?" Nico asked. Julian clearly had thoughts about this, but couldn't organize them fast enough, which was unusual enough to be temporarily paralyzing. He turned back to Dante instead. "Can you play cards?" Julian demanded. "I can learn," Dante said. Julian accepted this. He got down from the chair and went to retrieve the card game from the garden, with the energy of someone who had an agenda now, which was somewhat indistinguishable from his normal state. Nico looked at Dante for a long private moment. Then he reached over and picked up the cup of cold chocolate Evelyn had made him earlier, which he'd abandoned when called inside, and took a sip and sat down at the table like the matter was processed and filed. The afternoon was ordinary in ways that felt surreal. Julian taught Dante his version of the card game, which still had the invented rules, and Dante played it straight, without asking for clarification on the clearly improvised elements, which earned him something in Julian's economy that was invisible but definite. Nico played too, silent and systematic, winning every hand by paying attention. Evelyn watched from the other end of the table and tried to feel something she could name, but the thing she felt didn't have a clean name. It was something like grief, and something like relief, and something like the specific exhaustion of having held a very heavy thing for a very long time, and finally setting it down on a surface you weren't entirely sure was stable. That night, after the boys were in bed, Marcello came inside from the perimeter and stood in the kitchen doorway with his jacket over his arm, and his expression doing something Evelyn hadn't seen it do before, which was uncertainty. "There's something you both need to hear," he said. Dante looked at him. "Now?" "Yes." They sat at the table. Marcello sat across from them. He placed his phone between them, screen up, with a photograph pulled up that took Evelyn a moment to process fully. It was a man she didn't recognize. Mid-40s, heavy-set in what appeared to be a restaurant. "His name is Ferrante," Marcello said. "He runs the Calderone family's intelligence operations. We've been watching him for 3 days. Tonight he made contact." He paused. "With someone inside our organization. Someone who has been giving him information for the past 6 months." Dante went very still. Evelyn looked at Marcello. "Who?" Marcello looked at Dante, not at her, which told her the answer was not a stranger. "Who?" Dante said. His voice had dropped. Marcello said a name. It was the name of a man Evelyn had met once, briefly, at a dinner in Rome, before everything fell apart, a senior member of Dante's inner circle, someone she'd understood to be practically family. Someone who had been with the organization for over 15 years. Dante looked at the photograph on the phone. He looked at it for a long time. "How long have you known?" he said. 3 days confirmed. "I had a suspicion for 6 weeks. I needed to be certain." 6 weeks, Dante said. I'm sorry, Marcelo said. I needed to be certain before I brought it to you. What information? Dante said. What did he give them? Marcelo was quiet for a beat that lasted a second too long. The Sintra address, he said. He gave them this location. The room reconfigured around that sentence. Evelyn felt it happen, the way a space shifts when you understand something that changes the nature of everything inside it. They know we're here, she said. Since this afternoon, Marcelo said. Which means the timeline I gave you 3 days is wrong. If they know the location, they don't need to manufacture the legal action anymore. They can move directly. How directly, Dante said. Tonight, Marcelo said. Or before morning. That's my assessment. Dante sissed up. Whatever had been in his face for the past several hours, the careful restraint, the measured patience of a man trying to earn something, rather than take it, was gone now. What was underneath it was the other version, the one Evelyn had understood theoretically, but never seen fully deployed. The version that had made the Moretti name what it was. Marcelo, he said, get the boys and Evelyn to the secondary location. Do it now, quietly. Don't wake them if you can help it. And the source, Marcelo said. I'll deal with that, Dante said. He picked up his phone. He was already dialing. Evelyn stood up. Where are we going? Safer, Dante said. I'm sorry. I know that's not. Where? She said. A property in the Alentejo. 6 hours south. Nobody in my organization knows it exists except Marcelo. He held her gaze. Nobody. It's clean. And the source, she said. The person who gave them this address. Are they here? Dante's expression told her the answer before he confirmed it with a single nod. He was inside the house. Someone Dante had trusted for 15 years was inside the walls of this house, with her children sleeping 20 meters down the corridor, and had told the Calderon family exactly where to find them. She didn't say anything else. She went to the boys' room. She had packed for emergencies before. Not often, but enough to know how. She knew which things mattered and which didn't. She rolled Nico first because he woke more quietly, pressing her hand gently against his shoulder. He opened his eyes and looked at her, and seemed to understand from her face that this was not a normal waking. We're going, she said softly. It's okay, put your shoes on. He sat up. He put his shoes on. He didn't ask questions, not yet, which was its own kind of heartbreak, the adaptability of a child who had learned to read emergency without being told it was one. Julian was harder. Julian required 3 attempts and came up from sleep loudly, until she pressed her finger to her lips, and he registered the signal and went quiet, blinking. Confused but compliant, in the specific way he was compliant, when he understood that Evelyn being serious meant something real. She got them out to the corridor. Marcelo was waiting. He had 2 bags, 1 each. He took Julian's hand and Julian let him, still half asleep, moving on trust. Evelyn held Nico's hand, and they moved through the dark house toward the side door, the one that opened to the far side of the garden, away from the main gate. They passed the study. Through the closed door, she heard Dante's voice. Low, cold, the kind of cold that has been achieved deliberately rather than arrived at naturally. She heard a second voice, defensive, breaking at the edges. She did not stop. She kept Nico's hand in hers and kept moving. The side door opened silently. The night outside was cool and smelled like pine and distance. Marcelo's car was already there, pulled close, engine off. A second car behind it, 2 men she recognized as Marcelo's most trusted. She got the boys into the back seat. Julian was asleep again before the door closed, which was something close to a mercy. Nico sat beside her and put his head against her arm. Mama, he said. I know, she said. Is Dante coming? She looked at the dark house, the study window. Later she said, Marcelo got in. He started the engine. They pulled away slowly, no lights, until they hit the main road, and then the headlights came on and the trees came up on either side, and they were moving south, away from everything that had just happened, away from the trust that had been purchased over 5 years, and cashed out in a single conversation through a security channel, away from the house where Dante was in a room with a man who had put her children's location in the hands of people who would have used them as weapons. Nico's hand was in hers. Julian's head was against her shoulder now, the warm, trusting weight of a sleeping child who believed entirely that the adult next to him had the situation under control. She looked out the window at the dark Portuguese hills moving past. She had made every decision carefully. She had been deliberate and methodical, and she had survived 5 years of building something clean and small and safe, and she had invited Dante's world back in with both eyes open, and she had believed she had actually allowed herself to believe. The controlled entry of it would mean the controlled entry of its dangers, too. She had believed that. The car moved through the dark. And somewhere behind her, in a study in a stone house in the hills, Dante Moretti was sitting across from a man he'd trusted for 15 years, asking a question whose answer had already been given. And Evelyn understood fully, completely, with the cold clarity that comes when you stop, hoping the situation is something other than what it is that the world she had spent 5 years protecting her children from had not waited for an invitation. It had simply waited for a door, and she had opened it herself. The Alentejo property was a farmhouse, not the kind of farmhouse that had been renovated into something tasteful and expensive, with designer fixtures and reclaimed wood and a wine cellar. The actual kind stone walls, 2 feet thick, small windows cut deep into them, floors that were cold even in summer, a kitchen that smelled like iron and old wood, and the particular mineral damp of a building that had been standing for 150 years and intended to stand for 150 more. There was a garden that had gone mostly wild, an olive grove beyond it, and nothing else visible in any direction except hills and dark, and the occasional far-off light from a village that was far enough away to be irrelevant. Marcelo had the key. He'd had it for 3 years, he told her quietly, while the boys slept in the back seat, and the headlights carved through the pre-dawn dark of the Alentejo plain. Dante had bought it through a name that connected to nothing, paid cash through 4 intermediary transactions, told nobody. Marcelo had been told only because Marcelo needed to know one safe location in case of exactly this. Has he used it before? Evelyn asked. No, Marcelo said. He bought it for you. She looked at the road ahead and didn't say anything. They arrived at 4:40 in the morning. She carried Nico inside, still sleeping, and settled him on a narrow bed in the room at the back of the house. Marcelo carried Julian, who woke briefly, registered nothing alarming, and went immediately back to sleep with the environmental indifference of someone who trusted the world completely. She wished she could do that. She sat at the kitchen table while Marcelo checked the perimeter and made calls in low, rapid Italian. And she looked at the stone walls and the single bulb hanging from the ceiling and thought about the fact that Dante had bought this house and told no one and left it empty for 3 years, waiting. Her phone buzzed. Dante, we're moving, 6 hours behind you. Don't use the main road after the junction at Evora. Marcelo knows the route. I'll explain everything when I get there. She typed back the source. What happened? 3 minutes passed. Then handled. He won't be a problem. She put the phone down. She didn't ask for clarification. She understood what handled meant in Dante Moretti's vocabulary, and she understood that she lived now, at the edge of a world where handled was a word that covered a multitude of things she would never fully know and probably should not. She had opened the door. She had known what was on the other side. She made coffee with what Marcelo had brought from the car, a small bag of provisions, practical and sufficient, the kit of a man who had planned for emergencies many times before. The coffee was strong and tasted like the absence of sleep, and she drank it standing at the kitchen window, looking out at the olive grove going slowly visible in the pre-dawn gray. At 7, Nico appeared in the kitchen doorway. He looked at her. He looked at the unfamiliar room with the same systematic assessment he always applied to new spaces' corners, exits, light sources, the location of the other people he trusted. He found Marcelo in the living room. He came to stand beside Evelyn at the window. This isn't the other house, he said. No, she said. We moved agains. He thought about this. Is Dante coming? Yes. Okay, he looked at the olive grove. Can I go outside? In a little while. Let it get lighter first. He accepted this and went to investigate the kitchen with the focused curiosity of a child who had learned that new environments contained interesting things if you looked carefully enough. And Evelyn watched him open a cabinet and examine its contents with scientific seriousness and thought, not for the first time, about what kind of man he was going to be, this patient, careful, honest little person who had come out of the wreckage of her life and was somehow, improbably, entirely himself. Dante arrived at 10:43. She heard the car first, then Marcelo's voice outside, then the front door. Julian heard it too and appeared from the back of the house at speed, because Julian's internal radar for arrivals was essentially perfect, and he hit the kitchen at the same moment Dante came through the door. Dante looked like 6 hours of bad road and worse decisions. There was a cut along his left jaw that had been roughly attended to, and a bruise developing under his right eye that hadn't been there the night before. His jacket was gone. He was in a dark shirt with the sleeves pushed up, and his hands showed the specific rawnesses of someone who had used them in ways he hadn't planned to articulate. Julian looked at his face with frank curiosity. "What happened to your eye?" "I had a disagreement with someone," Dante said. "Did you win?" "Julian," Evelyn said. "It's a fair question," Nico said from the kitchen doorway, without looking up from the orange he was attempting to peel. Dante looked at Nico. Something passed through his expression. There was almost a smile, and didn't quite make it. "Yes," he said, "I won." Julian accepted this completely, and moved on to a question about whether there were eggs, because he wanted eggs. Nico returned his full attention to the orange. Evelyn looked at Dante, and the bruise under his eye, and the cut along his jaw, and the hands that had been used, and she felt something she was not going to examine right now, and probably not later either. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She brought him coffee. She sat across from him while Julian negotiated with Marcelo about eggs in the background, and she looked at the cut. "The Calderons," she said. "What's the situation?" "They moved on the Sintra house at 2 a.m, he said. "My people were ready. 3 of theirs are in Portuguese hospital custody. 2 more are in the wind." He stopped. He wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. "Ferrante wasn't there personally. He doesn't get his hands dirty. He'll reassess and reposition. How long before he reassesses?" "Fast. He's not a man who takes a loss and sits with it." Dante looked at her directly. "The legal documents we filed are now registered. The boys are on record as mine. That doesn't stop a physical threat, but it means any legal mechanism Ferrante tries to manufacture will be challenged immediately with documentation that predates the attempt. So we're safe here," she said. "For now," he said. "We need to move again within 48 hours. I have a location in Rome." "No," she said. "Evelyn, I have been in 4 locations in 3 days," she said. "My children have woken up twice in strange places without understanding why. I am not putting them back in a car for another 6 hours, and I am not taking them to Rome, where every person who has a problem with you knows your address. The Rome property is secure. Everything was secure," she said. "The Sintra house was secure until someone inside your own organization gave up the address." He stopped. She was right, and they both knew it. "The source of the leak," she said. "Who else knew about Sintra besides him? No one in that tier." "I've run the communications. You missed him for 6 weeks," she said. "Not cruel, just true." He took that. "Yes. So running the communications tells me what exactly?" He didn't answer, which was itself an answer. She looked at him. "The bruise, the cut, the hands. I need 24 hours here," she said. "The boys need 24 hours of not moving. And you need," she gestured at his face. "To let me look at that properly." He looked faintly surprised. "Don't make it a thing," she said. "Sit still." She found the first aid kit in the bag. Marcelo had packed it. It was comprehensive in ways that told her Marcelo had done this before, and she cleaned the cut on his jaw with the focus of someone who needed a task small enough to control. His jaw was tense under her fingers. He didn't move. "It's not deep," she said. "It doesn't need closing." "I know," he said. "The eye is just bruising. Nothing to do about that." "I know that too." She sat back. She looked at him, at the whole of him, the damage and the coffee cup, and the exhaustion he was managing, with the practiced capability of a man who had long since stopped expecting comfort after bad nights. "Tell me about Ferrante," she said. "Everything. Not what you think I need to know." "What's actually true," he told her. Ferrante had been building toward this for 2 years. The Calderon family had been positioning for a generational move not just against the Moretti operation, but against 3 separate organizations, a coordinated effort to restructure the criminal landscape of Southern Europe in a single aggressive cycle. Dante and his allies had known a move was coming, but had miscalculated the timeline by 8 months, which in this particular world was the difference between prepared and exposed. The man who'd been leaking information had been flipped by Ferrante 18 months ago. The method was money first. Then leverage Ferrante had found something the man needed to keep hidden and had made the price of keeping it hidden a steady stream of operational information. Small things at first, then bigger things. Then, when the Sintra house became relevant, the address. "He's been in the organization for 15 years, Evelyn said. 16, Dante said. And you didn't see it? No, he said. I didn't. She let that sit without comment. It didn't need comment. What does Ferrante want? She said, specifically. Not the general objective. What does he want from you? Directly. That makes my children useful to him. Dante was quiet for a moment. There's a financial network, he said. I control access to a series of accounts and structures that Ferrante needs to move his organization's capital through a restructuring. It's not something he can build independently. It took my predecessor 30 years to establish it, and I've spent the past decade maintaining it. Without it, the Calderon move collapses. They can take territory and eliminate rivals, but they can't consolidate economically. They'd be powerful and broke. So he wants your cooperation, she said. He wants me to open the network voluntarily, or he wants enough leverage to force me to. He looked at her. The boys, as my acknowledged heirs, would represent the kind of leverage that. Stop, she said, I understand. She stood up. She walked to the window. The olive grove in daylight was beautiful in the resigned, ancient way of things that have survived centuries by being difficult to destroy. He's going to come here, she said. He doesn't know. He's going to come, she said. This is a man who planned 2 years ahead and has a source inside your closest circle. He doesn't stop because one location failed. He recalibrates. She turned. Dante. He is going to find us here. Dante's expression told her she wasn't wrong. How long, she said. He didn't answer immediately. She watched him run the calculation, the variables she didn't have access to, the timelines he understood from a world she'd kept herself outside of for 5 years. 36 hours, he said, maybe less if he has resources in the Alentejo I don't know about. Can you end it? She said. Before that. Can you end the Ferrante situation? Not manage it, not contain it, end it. What I can do, he said slowly, is make the network inaccessible to anyone but me, permanently and irreversibly, which removes the incentive entirely. If the network can't be leveraged, the boys stop being useful as leverage. It doesn't stop Ferrante from retaliating for the Sintra operation, but it removes the strategic motive. How do you do that? There are people I need to contact. Transactions I need to initiate. He checked his phone. 18 hours with the right cooperation. 24 without. Then do it, she said, now. Right now, while we're still here. If I start that process, Ferrante will know within hours. He is monitoring on my financial communications. It will trigger him to accelerate his timeline. Accelerate to what? To here, he said, directly. The room was very quiet. Julian's voice drifted in from somewhere deeper in the house, asking Marcelo something about the olive trees. Nico's quieter voice asking something else. Ordinary sounds. The sounds of two boys doing what boys did when they were temporarily confused about their location but trusted the adults around them. She looked at Dante. So you start the process, she said, and we have 18 hours before Ferrante comes versus 36 hours before he comes anyway, and the network is still accessible. That's accurate, he said. Then we have 18 hours, she said. And we use them. He looked at her for a long moment. Evelyn, make your calls, she said. I'll handle the boys. He held her gaze for another 2 seconds, and then he picked up his phone and went to the far end of the kitchen and began. The next 6 hours were the strangest of Evelyn's life, which was saying something given the competition. Dante worked the phone and the laptop Marcelo produced from the car, speaking in rapid Italian, and occasionally in 2 other languages she partially tracked, building the financial fortress one transaction at a time, while Julian asked him 7 questions that he answered distractedly and accurately and without pausing his work, which Julian found enormously satisfying. Nico sat near Evelyn and drew in a notebook he'd brought from the Sintra house, the kind of precise geometric drawings he made when he was thinking about something he wasn't ready to say yet. Marcelo cooked. This turned out to be one of those facts about a person that recontextualized other things Marcelo, who had the bearing of a man who had spent 30 years adjacent to serious violence, cooked with focused attention and quiet competence, producing lunch from the provision bag that was significantly better than anything the situation warranted. Julian ate it with unself-conscious enthusiasm. Nico ate it methodically. Dante ate without appearing to notice what he was eating. Evelyn ate and watched the road. At 3 in the afternoon, Marcelo's phone buzzed. He looked at it and then at Dante. Ferrante's moving, he said. 12 hours, not 18. He has someone in the Evora banking network. He flagged the transactions. Dante didn't look up from his screen. How far along are we? 60%, Marcello said. Then we need 6 more hours and we have 12, Dante said. We're fine. We have 12 hours if his timeline is accurate, Marcello said. If he accelerates further, then we're less fine, Dante said. Keep the perimeter. Marcello went back outside. At 5, Nico put down his pencil and looked at Evelyn. Something is happening, he said. We're dealing with it, she said. I know, he said. I'm not scared. He picked up his pencil again. I just wanted you to know that I know. She looked at her son. 5 years old. This extraordinary, infuriating, specific person. Thank you, she said. Julian looked up from where he'd been constructing something architectural out of a set of small stones he'd collected from the garden. What's happening, he said. We're being very cautious about some people who aren't very nice, Evelyn said. Julian processed this. The men from our building? Related to them, yes. He nodded. He went back to his stones. Marcello will handle it, he said with complete confidence, which told her things about what Julian had observed and absorbed over the past 3 days that she found both reassuring and slightly alarming. At 7:40 in the evening, 2 things happened within 4 minutes of each other. The first was Dante closing his laptop and saying, "It's done," in a voice that had no triumph in it, just the flat, exhausted fact of a thing completed. The network was closed, locked in a structure that required his active participation to access, and would, in his absence, simply remain inaccessible to anyone indefinitely. The incentive was gone. The second was Marcello coming through the door with a different quality of movement than his previous entries, faster, quieter, and with his right hand not where it usually was. They're early, Marcello said. Dante was on his feet before the sentence finished. How early, said. Vehicle on the access road. 1 confirmed, possibly a second behind it. 8 minutes. Dante looked at Evelyn. She was already standing. The back, she said. Through the grove. Yes, he said. Marcello, I know, Marcello said. I'm not leaving without you, she said, and it came out with more force than she'd intended, and she meant every syllable of it, and she watched Dante register that, and something moved through him that he didn't have time to address. Take the boys through the grove, he said. There's a track at the far edge that leads to a road. A car there. Keys in it, Marcello arranged it 2 hours ago. He was moving while he talked, pulling on his jacket. Drive south. Town called Serpa. There's an address. He reached into his jacket and produced a folded paper, small, written in his own hand. People I trust completely. You'll be safe there until I can reach you. She took the paper. And you, she said. I need to buy you the time to get clear. Evelyn, he stopped. He looked at her. The bruise under his eye was fully out now, dark and spreading, and the cut on his jaw had dried to a thin, dark line. He looked like a man who had been making difficult decisions for a very long time and had arrived at one that cost more than the others. I need you to trust me, one more time. She looked at him. She thought about 5 years. She thought about a ring on a nightstand and 2 words on a piece of paper. She thought about a corridor with tall windows and a 3-inch gap in a door. She thought about the past 3 days, the kitchen in Villa Nova de Gaia, the card game with invented rules, Nico's hand in hers in the back of a car moving through dark hills. She thought about what handled meant and what bought the network time meant and what 8 minutes meant. You come back, she said. Yes, he said. Not a general yes, she said. A specific yes, you come back. He held her gaze. I come back, he said. She turned. Boys, now. We're going for a walk. Julian looked up. Now? Now, she said. Bring the stones if you want. 1 pocket. Julian grabbed a fistful of stones with the decisiveness of a person who had priorities. Nico had already put on his shoes. He looked at Dante as he passed through the kitchen. Dante looked back. Something passed between them, the boy and the man, 5 years old and 42, something that had no words because it was too new to have language yet, too uncertain of its own shape. But it was there, and it was real, and Nico gave a small nod, the kind that means, I understand more than I'm saying, and went through the back door into the evening air. Evelyn went last. She stopped at the door. Dante was 6 feet away, and Marcello was beside him, and the sound of a vehicle on gravel was audible now at the edge of hearing, low and deliberate. She looked at him. She could see every choice he had ever made written somewhere on him, the ones that had cost her, the ones that had cost him, the years between them like weather you move through and cannot stop but can survive. Dante, she said. Go, he said. She went. The olive grove closed around her, and the boys like a held breath, the trees old and gnarled and indifferent, the ground between them soft with fallen leaves, and the particular cool of an Alentejo evening coming down. She held Julian's hand. Nico moved beside her, close, matching her pace without instruction. She moved at the fastest speed that didn't look like running, because running communicated emergency, and she needed her sons to be brave and calm, and she needed to be the thing they calibrated against. Behind them, back at the house, she heard a car door. Then voices. She kept walking. Julian looked up at the olive trees and said quietly, "These are old." "Very," she said. "How old?" "Hundreds of years." He considered this with the appropriate gravity. "That's more than Dante's old." "Yes," she said. "More than Marcello's old, too." "Much more," she said. "How old are you?" he said. "Old enough," she said. "Keep walking." He kept walking. The track at the far edge of the grove was where Dante had said it would be, which should not have surprised her by now, but did anyway. Because there was something about having what you were told would be there actually be there that was harder to take for granted than it should have been. The car was small, unremarkable, dust-colored in the evening light. She found the keys in the wheel well and got the boys in the back and started the engine and sat for 1 second with her hands on the wheel. Behind her at the house, something broke. Not a sound she could identify specifically, just the noise of things not being careful anymore. She put the car in gear. She drove south. Julian fell asleep 20 minutes out, the stones from the garden still in his jacket pocket, the geometry of a 5-year-old's trust in the people around him, expressed in his completely unconscious face. Nico did not sleep. He sat and looked out the window and eventually said, "Marcello will be okay." "Yes," she said. "And Dante," he said. She looked at the road ahead. The dark coming down on the Alentejo plain, flat and enormous, the sky big enough to hold everything. "Yes," she said. Her phone was on the seat beside her. She watched it in her peripheral vision the way you watch something you need to have news from, the way you watch a thing you are not yet prepared to learn from, but cannot stop needing to hear. At 11:17, driving through the outskirts of a town she didn't know, with both boys asleep in the back and the folded paper with the Serpa address, on the seat beside the phone lit up. A message. She pulled over. She looked at the screen. It was a single word, from Dante's number, time-stamped 4 minutes ago, and the word was coming. She sat in the pulled-over car on the edge of an Alentejo town, with her sleeping children in the back seat, and the ancient dark of the Portuguese plain outside every window. And she put the phone face down on the seat and pressed both hands flat on the steering wheel and let out a breath that had been held, she realized, for approximately the last 3 hours. She picked the phone back up. She typed Serpa, drive safe. She put it down. She started the car. She drove. And somewhere behind her on the same dark road, closing the distance, Dante Moretti drove toward the address he'd written in his own hand, toward the woman who had told him to come back and meant it, toward 2 boys sleeping in a car who carried his grandmother's hands in his father's jaw, and 5 years of a life built without him that he was going to spend the rest of his learning how to be worthy of. The road south was long, and the dark was complete, and the olive groves stood in the fields on either side like old witnesses, and the distance between them was closing at the speed of 2 cars moving toward the same point. And Evelyn drove, and Dante drove, and the morning was still hours away, but it was coming. It was always going to come. The question had only ever been what they would be willing to do to reach it. The house in Serpa was a narrow 2-story building on a street so quiet that Evelyn could hear her own footsteps on the cobblestones when she got out of the car. The address on the folded paper led to a green door with a brass knocker, shaped like a fish, which was not what she'd expected, though she hadn't had a specific expectation. She knocked at 12:40 in the morning, with Julian half asleep on her shoulder, and Nico standing beside her, shoes untied, holding the car keys because she'd handed them to him automatically and he'd taken them without comment. The woman who answered the door was in her 60s, compact and deliberate, in the way of someone who had spent a lifetime making quick assessments of situations presented to her at inconvenient hours. She looked at Evelyn, at the boys, at the car behind them on the empty street. She said nothing for a moment. Then she stepped back and held the door open. "Come in," she said in English, with a Portuguese accent that had spent some years in proximity to Italian. "I was told to expect you." Her name was Dora. She had known Dante's father, she said, in a tone that closed further inquiry on the subject. She had 3 spare rooms and an opinion about warm milk for children who'd been in cars too long, which she implemented without asking permission. Julian accepted the milk with the unself-conscious gratitude of a person whose needs were simple and immediate. Nico held his cup in both hands and watched Dora with the careful attention he gave to new people he was deciding about. She showed them to 2 rooms on the upper floor. The beds were made with the precision of someone who kept things ready out of habit rather than expectation. Evelyn put Julian down and he was asleep before she'd finished pulling the blanket up. She sat on the edge of Nico's bed and he looked at the ceiling. "Are you going to sleep?" she asked. "In a minute," he said. He turned his head to look at her. "You're waiting for Dante." "Yes, me too," he said. She smoothed his hair back from his forehead. He let her do it, which he didn't always, and she took that for what it was. "Go to sleep," she said. "He'll be here when you wake up." She said it with more certainty than she had, which was what you did. Nico seemed to understand both the certainty and the gap behind it, and he chose to accept the certainty, which was its own kind of grace. He was asleep in 10 minutes. She went downstairs. Dora had left a pot of coffee on the stove and gone to bed without ceremony, which Evelyn appreciated so much it was almost painful. She sat at the kitchen table with her phone and her coffee and the green door and waited. Dante arrived at 2:17. She heard the car first, then a door, then footsteps on the cobblestones that she recognized by their pace and weight before she saw anything through the window glass. She stood up. She didn't go to the door, she stood in the kitchen and waited until he knocked, twice, the way he'd knocked at her apartment in a different life, when he came to pick her up for dinner, which was not a thing she'd remembered until this exact moment. She opened the door. He had Marcelo with him. Marcelo had a split lip and was holding his left arm at an angle that suggested the shoulder was managing something it would prefer not to manage. He nodded at Evelyn with the composure of a man who considered his current physical state to be well within normal operational parameters and went past her into the kitchen without being asked, located the coffee, and sat down. Dante stood in the doorway. He was worse than she'd left him. There was blood on his shirt that wasn't from the cut, on his jaw dried dark, not fresh. His knuckles were split. The bruise under his eye had company now, a deeper mark along his cheekbone that would be spectacular by morning. He was standing under his own power, and his eyes were clear, and that was what mattered, and she held on to that, and didn't think about the blood on his shirt. "Boys," he said asleep, she said, both of them. "Come inside." He came inside. She closed the green door behind him. She made him sit at the table across from Marcelo, and she found the first aid kit Dora had left on the counter, because of course Dora had left one. Because Dora, who understood, was a woman who understood what kind of nights produced the kind of guests she received, and she worked on Marcelo's shoulder first, because it was clearly the more urgent problem. Strapping it with the focused efficiency she'd developed over the past several days of being the person who dealt with the practical aftermath of other people's decisions. Marcelo bore it without comment and drank his coffee and looked at the wall. Then she turned to Dante. He let her work. He sat still and watched her hands and said nothing while she cleaned the new damage and assessed what needed attention and gave it. His knuckles were the worst of it, the skin broken across 3 of them on the right hand, the kind of injury that came from using your fist against something that didn't give easily. She cleaned them carefully and felt his hand tense and release under hers and kept working. "Ferrante," she said. "In custody," Dante said. "Portuguese National Police. He had an outstanding warrant from an Interpol flag 3 years old that my lawyers surfaced at a convenient moment. He'll fight it. He has money and lawyers, but the process will take long enough to matter. And the Calderon operation. Without Ferrante directing it, and without the financial network as a target, it fractures. There are 3 other men who could theoretically take his position, but they don't trust each other, and they never have. That's structural, not temporary." He paused. "It's not permanent." "Nothing is permanent. But it's finished for the foreseeable." She finished with his right hand. She sat back. "And the man from your organization," she said. "The one who gave up the Sintra address." Dante was quiet for a moment. "He's been removed from any position of access. He'll face consequences that don't involve me directly. There are people he wronged in the process of working with Ferrante who have their own accounting to conduct. I'm not going to pretend that's clean. I'm not asking for clean," she said. "I'm asking for honest." Then honestly, he said, "I don't know exactly what happens to him, and I'm not going to find out." She looked at him. She looked at the specific weight in the way he said that, not defensiveness, not justification. Just the flat, honest statement of a man living inside a world with edges that didn't soften. She had known what the world looked like when she let it back in. She had opened the door with both eyes open. She didn't get to be surprised by what lived on the other side of it. "Okay," she said. He looked at her carefully. "Okay. It's not approval," she said. "It's not endorsement. It's me acknowledging the reality of what you are and the world you operate in. I'm not going to pretend I don't know. I don't want you to pretend," he said. "I know," she said. "That's the only reason we're having this conversation." Marcelo finished his coffee. He stood up with the careful movement of someone managing a compromised shoulder and said he was going to sleep, and he went upstairs, and the kitchen was quiet. Evelyn and Dante sat at the table, the green door, the coffee pot, the specific silence of a small town at 3 in the morning, which is different from any other silence, deeper, more absolute. Like the town has genuinely put the day down and gone somewhere else entirely. "What happens now?" Evelyn said. He turned his coffee cup slowly in his hands. His split knuckles caught the light. "That's your question to answer." "Not mine. I'm asking you for your part of it," she said. "I'll answer my part, but you have to tell me yours first." He looked at the cup. "I want to know my sons," he said. "Whatever the shape of that is. Whatever you'll allow. I want to be in their lives. And me," she said. He looked up. He looked at her directly, the way he had always been able to, the quality of attention that had been the first thing about him, that caught her this specific, complete focus, like everything else in the room ceased to exist. "And you," he said. "If there's any version of that you can live with. If there isn't, I accept that too. I accept whatever you decide." "You said that before," she said, "in Portugal. And I believed you then, but I also thought you were managing the situation." "I'm not sure I knew the difference. I was managing the situation," he said. "And I meant it." Both things were true. She thought about that. "That's very you," she said. "Yes," he said. "It is." She got up and refilled her coffee. She stood at the stove with her back to him for a moment, looking at the pot, not thinking about anything specific, so much as letting everything settle into its actual shape without forcing it. She thought about the ring she'd left on a nightstand in Rome. 2 words on a folded piece of paper. The bus at 6:15 in the morning, with the city disappearing behind it. She thought about a pension room in Cascais and a language course and 2 lines on a test, and sitting in a parking lot outside a clinic with her phone in her hand and his number on the screen. She thought about 5 years of pasta on Tuesday nights, and Dona Fernanda and the drawings on the refrigerator, and Julian's impossible enthusiasm for everything, and Nico's hand in hers, and what it had cost and what it had built, and whether any of it had been wasted, and whether any of it could have gone differently. She turned around. "I need you to do something," she said. "Tell me," he said. "The criminal operation," she said. "Not all of it. I'm not asking you to dissolve something built over generations overnight, and I'm not naive enough to think that's possible. But the direction of it. What you're moving toward." She sat back down. She looked at him. "I need to see you moving away from it. Not for me. Not as a condition I'm imposing. Because it's the only future the boys can actually live in without spending their whole lives looking over their shoulders." He was quiet. "I know you've thought about this," she said. "You're not a man who doesn't think about things." "I've thought about it," he said. "And I've already started," he said. "Marcelo has been moving into a position to take operational control for 18 months. Not as a front, actually. Genuinely. I've been restructuring the financial side to separate the legitimate holdings from the operations that can't be made legitimate. It's slow. It takes years. It's not a switch I can flip." "I know it's not a switch," she said. "Some of what I am doesn't change," he said. "The name doesn't change. The history doesn't change. The boys carry the name." "I know," she said. "And you're still here," he said. Not a challenge. Just the fact of it, stated plainly. She looked at him. "I'm still here," she said. The morning came the way. Morning comes to small Portuguese towns in the south slowly, with the light changing color before it changed intensity, the sky going from black to the specific deep blue that exists for about 20 minutes before the actual dawn arrives and makes everything ordinary again. Evelyn was still at the kitchen table when she heard the footsteps on the stairs. Julian hit the kitchen at his standard velocity, took in Dante at the table, and changed course immediately to install himself in the chair beside him. You made it, Julian said, with the satisfaction of a person whose prediction has been confirmed. I made it, Dante said. I told Nico you'd make it, Julian said. He looked at Dante's face with the frank appraisal he brought to all new information. Your eye is worse, it is, Dante agreed. Does it hurt? A bit. Julian nodded, filing this away. Mama's good at fixing things, he said. She fixed Nico's knee when he fell off the wall last year. There was a lot of blood, but she was very calm. I believe it, Dante said. Nico appeared in the doorway a minute later. He was dressed, shoes on, hair not brushed, looking at the kitchen with the morning assessment he always ran before committing to the day. He looked at Dante. He looked at Evelyn. He looked at the coffee pot, which was not directly relevant to him, but which he noted anyway. He came to the table and sat down. You're tired, he told Dante. Yes, Dante said. You should sleep, Nico said. We'll be here. Dante looked at the boy, at the 5-year-old delivering this information with the straightforward practicality of someone who understood that people needed sleep and that stating obvious truths was a form of care. He looked at him for a moment longer than the sentence required. Okay, Dante said. He went upstairs. He slept for 6 hours. In those 6 hours, Dora made breakfast and Julian adopted her with his characteristic speed and total commitment, following her around the kitchen, asking questions about everything she touched. Nico helped set the table with the methodical competence he brought to physical tasks. Evelyn sat and drank coffee and felt for the first time in 5 days something that was not adrenaline and not dread, and not the baseline anxiety of managed emergency. She felt tired, not the bad kind. The kind that arrives when the thing you've been running from or toward has finally resolved into something you can stop running about, and your body takes the opportunity to submit its accumulated invoice. She drank her coffee and let Julian charm Dora and let Nico arrange the silverware with geometric precision and let the morning be what it was. Dante came down at noon. He'd showered. He'd found a clean shirt somewhere in Marcello's bag, probably. Was Marcello being a man who packed for contingencies? The bruise under his eye was exactly as spectacular as she'd predicted. He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at the scene. Julian at Dora's elbow, learning something about how to slice bread correctly. Nico at the table with his notebook. Evelyn at the window with the second cup of coffee of the morning, and his face did the thing it had done in the Villa Nova de Gaia apartment when he'd seen the drawings on the refrigerator. She let him feel it. She didn't look away. He came and sat beside her at the window. Marcello's organizing the travel back, he said quietly. The Rome property is cleared and secured. I'd like to take you there. All of you. He paused. If you're willing. She looked at the street outside. The green door. The cobblestones in the midday light. How long, she said, until Ferrante's legal situation resolves one way or the other. 6 months, he said, to be certain. Then we go to Rome for 6 months, she said. After that, I decide where we live. Not you, me. Yes, he said. And the boys go to school, a normal school, not something surrounded by a security operation. Normal. There will be some security present, he said. Discreet, discreet, she repeated. Not visible. Not men in dark jackets at the school gate, making other parents nervous. Discreet, he confirmed. And separate rooms, she said. In Rome, my own space. He looked at her, of course. I'm not saying forever, she said. I'm saying now. She stopped. She looked for the honest version of it. I need to find out who we are now, before I can know what we're going to be. 5 years is a long time. You're not the same person, and neither am I, and pretending otherwise, because they're children and because we're both still. She stopped again. Because we're both still what? He said. She looked at him. You know what, she said? He held her gaze. Yes, he said. I know. She looked back at the street. A cat crossed the cobblestones in the particular unhurried manner of a cat that owned the cobblestones and was merely allowing humans to use them. Julian spotted it through the window and issued a soft sound of absolute delight. Can we get a cat? Julian said to the room generally. No, Evelyn said. Why not? Because you already have enough interests, she said. Cats are not an interest, Julian said with some dignity. They're a companion. The answer is still no. Dante, Julian said, pivoting immediately. Do you like cats? Dante glanced at Evelyn. Something in his expression that was the first genuinely unguarded thing she'd seen from him. Something light, almost helpless. The look of a man who had just understood that this was also part of it. This relentless, cheerful negotiation. I have no strong feelings about cats, Dante said carefully. That means yes, Julian told Nico. That does not mean yes, Nico said without looking up. The afternoon passed in the way of afternoons that don't have an agenda slowly, and with more substance than their pace suggested. Dora fed them lunch and declined all assistance with the washing up and went about her business, with the self-contained efficiency of a woman who had made her contribution and considered further fuss to be unnecessary. Marcelo sat in the garden with his shoulder and his phone and organized things that needed organizing. Julian explored the house with the systematic thoroughness of an archaeological survey. Nico found a bookshelf in the front room and worked his way through 3 books with pictures and 1 without, because Nico read above his level and had since he was 4, and Evelyn had long since stopped being surprised by it. Evelyn sat in the garden in the late afternoon sun, with Dante 2 chairs away, and said very little, which was its own kind of conversation. At one point he said, "I should have told Serafina to leave." That night. The moment he stopped. I should have stopped it before it became what it became. I'm not going to blame what happened on anything but my own failure. She listened. I know that doesn't fix it, he said. No, she said, it doesn't. But you should know I know it, he said. She looked at the olive trees beyond Dora's back wall. Old and gnarled and still producing, the way things do when they're built for persistence rather than elegance. I know you know it, she said. That was never the question. What was the question? He said. Whether knowing it meant anything, she said. Whether knowing you'd done something was the same as being different because of it. He was quiet. I think it's not, she said. I think knowing is just the first part. The second part is the years after the knowing. She paused. I've seen the years after. That's why I'm sitting here. He didn't say anything. He looked at his hands, the split knuckles beginning to heal in the way flesh heals, imperfectly and visibly, leaving evidence. Evelyn, she said. Not yet. Let it be what it is right now. Sit with me in this garden, and don't make it into something it has to be decided about yet. He settled back in his chair. They sat. The sun moved. The shadows of the olive trees beyond the wall went long and amber, and Julian came out and sat on the garden step and watched the cat from the street, which had apparently decided to sit on the other side of the low gate, and observe him in return. 2 creatures of equal curiosity assessing each other. Nico came out with his book and sat beside Julian and read, occasionally looking up to check on the cat-to-Julian situation and returning to his page. The 4 of them were in the same garden. That was the whole of it. That was the unremarkable, enormously weighted fact of the afternoon. 4 people in a garden in the south of Portugal. The light going gold, the cat on the gate, nobody running or planning or managing an emergency. They drove back to Rome 3 days later. The boys were in the back seat of a car with more legroom than the Alentejo car, and Julian slept for the first 2 hours and was awake and energetic for the remaining duration, which was a standard Julian distribution. Nico read and occasionally asked questions about what they were driving past, and Dante answered them from the front passenger seat with the particular focus of a man who had been given a specific and valued task and was not going to underperform it. Evelyn drove the first stretch. Marcelo drove the second. At one point, somewhere in the long rural section between 2 towns she didn't know, Nico put down his book and said to Dante, "What do you do for work?" Evelyn's hands adjusted on the steering wheel. Dante was quiet for a moment. "I manage some businesses," he said. "What kind of businesses?" "Complicated ones," Dante said. "Some of them legitimate. Some of them," he paused. "Some of them I'm in the process of stepping away from." "Why?" "Because they're not the kind of thing I want to be doing for the rest of my life," Dante said. Nico considered this. "What do you want to do instead?" Silence for a moment. "I'm not entirely sure yet," Dante said. "I'm working on it," Nico nodded. "That's okay," he said. "Mama changed jobs too. She used to do something different." "I know," Dante said. "She's good at a lot of things." Nico looked at the back of Evelyn's head with the expression of a child who is filing information and cross-referencing it with existing data. "Yes," he said. Then he picked his book back up. Julian, apparently having been listening with his eyes closed, said without opening them, "I want to manage complicated businesses when I'm big." "You want to manage everything," Nico said. "That's true," Julian said comfortably and went back to sleep. The Rome property was large and surrounded by a wall, and in a neighborhood that was old and quiet, and not the same property from the engagement party years ago. Dante had sold that one 2 years after Evelyn left. She learned from Marcelo while Dante was helping carry bags inside. He hadn't been able to stay in it, Marcello said, with the brevity of a man making an observation, not an editorial. She didn't ask for more detail. Her rooms were on the upper floor, separate from Dante's, as agreed. They were furnished with the kind of thoughtful simplicity that said someone had prepared them with a specific person in mind, rather than a general occupant. The books on the shelf were the kind she read. There was a desk positioned at the window she would have chosen. The colors were hers in a way that was subtle enough to be deniable, but wasn't. She stood in the doorway of the room for a moment. Then she put her bag down and unpacked, because that was what you did when you arrived somewhere. And she put things in drawers and hung 3 things in the wardrobe and set the small photograph of her mother on the nightstand and looked at the room with her objects in it and decided it was livable. It was livable. The weeks settled into a shape. The boys started school at a small international school 20 minutes from the property, in a car that was unremarkable and with a driver who was Marcello or one of 2 men Evelyn had met and made her own assessments of, and determined to be competent and discreet in the way she'd specified. Julian made 4 friends in the first week. Nico made 1, carefully selected, and was satisfied with this. Dante was in the house most days. He worked from a study on the ground floor, and the work he did was visibly the work of transition meetings, with lawyers, financial people, Marcello. The operational pieces being handed off, the legitimate holdings being sorted from the others. It was not glamorous work. It was paperwork and phone calls, and the occasional meeting that required him to leave and return with the look of a man who had navigated something difficult through sheer force of will. He helped with dinner 3 nights a week. He helped with dinner badly. At first, in the specific way of someone who has always had other people perform this function, and is now encountering the actual process for the first time at the age of 42. Julian supervised him with tremendous enthusiasm and occasional genuine criticism. Nico corrected his knife technique once, politely and precisely, and Dante thanked him and adjusted without embarrassment. He got better at it. Not impressive, just better. Functional. Present. Evelyn watched this from a middle distance, from the kitchen table where she worked in the evenings, or from the doorway, or from across the room. She watched him be imperfect and persistent at the same time, and she thought about what she'd said in Serpa about the years after the knowing, and whether she was watching them accumulate now, and whether that was what it looked like. She thought it might be. One evening in the 3rd month, she was on the terrace after the boys were in bed, the night warm and the city making its distant ambient sound beyond the wall, when Dante came out and sat in the chair beside her without asking, which he'd done before and she'd come to expect. They sat in silence for a while. "Serafina sent a letter," she said. He waited. "To the Rome address. She knew we were here." "Do you want to know how?" "No," she said. "It doesn't matter how." She had the letter in the pocket of her jacket. She'd put it there after reading it and hadn't taken it out since. She apologized. It was a real one, not the managed version. I could tell the difference. Annie says, "And I read it, and I thought about it, and I thought about what I said to her in Portugal, and whether I meant it absolutely or whether I meant it for then." She looked at the city lights beyond the wall. "I don't know yet. I might never know. I'm not going to force it into a resolution to make myself feel like a better person." "That's fair," he said. "Is it?" "Yes," he said. "Some things don't resolve into forgiveness. Some things resolve into distance, and distance is allowed." She looked at him. "You have some experience with that," she said. "Some," he said. She took the letter out of her pocket. She looked at it. The handwriting on the envelope was Serafina's. She'd always written in the same way, slightly too large for the space. She put it back. "I'll figure it out," she said. "Not today." "Not today," he agreed. The silence was comfortable. That was the thing she hadn't expected, and wouldn't have believed if someone had told her that there would come an evening when, sitting on this terrace in this city, would feel comfortable. Not fixed, not resolved, not healed in the clean way that things healed in stories. Just comfortable, the way a space becomes comfortable when the people in it have stopped performing for each other and started simply existing in the same direction. "I called the firm in Porto," she said, "the one I translated for. They have remote contracts available. I'm going to start taking them again." He nodded. "I'm not going to be I need my own work," she said. "My own income. My own thing that's mine, I know," he said. "It's not a statement about you," she said. "It's a statement about me." "I know that too," he said. She looked at him. The bruise under his eye had faded to nothing over the past weeks, and the cut on his jaw had healed to a thin line that would probably become a faint scar. He looked older than she'd first thought when she'd opened the door in Villa Nova de Gaia, and she'd thought then that he looked older. He looked like someone who had used up a significant portion of his reserves getting to this point, and was now figuring out how to operate without running on emergency fuel. She understood that. She was doing the same thing. One day at a time, she said, not to him specifically, to herself out loud in his presence. One day at a time, he said. She stood up. She was tired the good kind again, the accumulated kind, the kind that meant she had done what the day required and could stop now. She picked up her coffee cup. "Good night, Dante," she said. He said. She went inside. She checked on Julian sprawled diagonally across his bed in the way he slept, occupying all available space, the stones from the Alentejo garden on the nightstand, because he'd kept them all the way from Portugal and put them there the first night and showed no signs of reconsidering. She pulled his blanket up. He didn't stir. She checked on Nico on his back, hands folded on his chest like a small formal person, breathing evenly. The book from Dora's shelf on the nightstand, a bookmark in it. She stood in the doorway and watched him breathe for a moment. She thought about the parking lot outside the clinic in Cascais, the phone in her hand, his name on the screen. She thought about the choice she'd made then, to put the phone away, to choose the life she could build rather than the life she'd had. She had not been wrong to make that choice. She would not rewrite it if she could. It had made her who she was in ways she couldn't have predicted and couldn't afford to give back the independence, the competence, the knowledge that she could build something from nothing with her own hands and her own decisions and make it good. She had made it good. She was standing in it. She went to her room. She sat on the edge of the bed. She looked at the photograph of her mother on the nightstand, a woman she had lost at 19, a woman who had been imperfect and complicated and specific and real, the way people were when they were actually people. She thought about imperfect things that lasted. She thought about olive trees. She lay down. She looked at the ceiling. The window was open and the night air came through it, warm and faintly urban, the smell of a city that had been standing long enough to stop apologizing for what it was. She had been gone for 5 years. She was not back. That was the important distinction. She was not back in the sense of return, of restoration, of reversal. She was forward. She was here by choice, which was different in every way that mattered, from being here by default or circumstance, or because she hadn't managed to get out. She had gotten out. She had built something. She had decided to build something else now, in a different place with different materials, and the deciding was hers in a way that nothing that had happened to her had been able to take. Downstairs through the floor, she could hear the faint sound of the terrace door closing. Dante coming inside. Footsteps to the kitchen, the sound of the coffee cup going into the sink, the water running briefly. Then the footsteps to the other side of the house, to his rooms. The house went quiet. The city kept its distance. Nico and Julian slept in their rooms down the hall, carrying between them a grandmother's hands and a grandfather's jaw, and 5 years of Tuesday pasta and Dona Fernanda, and Portuguese school and stones collected from an Alentejo garden, and a card game with invented rules in the beginning, only the beginning, of understanding who their father was and what that meant for who they were going to be. And Evelyn lay in a room that was hers, and looked at the ceiling and did not feel afraid. That was the whole of it. That was what the 5 years and the crossing of Europe and the 2 words on a piece of paper and the parking lot and the hostel bathroom and the Tuesday nights and the card game and the green door in Serpa and the split knuckles healing on the terrace had been moving toward not a grand arrival, not a declaration, not a perfect ending that erased the cost. Just this, a room that was hers, 2 boys down the hall, a man on the other side of the house who was learning, at 42, how to cook dinner badly, and then better, who had knelt in a kitchen in Portugal and told a 5-year-old that you watch me, you decide from what I do, not what I say, and who is now living inside that sentence, daily, imperfectly, with the specific doggedness of someone who understands they have used up all their margin for error. It was not a perfect story. It was not a smooth one, or a clean one, or one where the cost was proportionate to the crime, or where justice arrived precisely calibrated and everyone got exactly what they deserved. It was a true one, in the way that fiction is true when it knows something real about what people are broken, and persistent and capable of terrible things, and also sometimes barely, improbably, capable of the long, difficult work of being better than their worst moment. Evelyn closed her eyes. The city breathed outside the window. She slept.